Tribulation of Myriad Races, Chapter 61, Killing Another Great Strength Cultivator, 1, 11th of June. A day later, news of what was happening finally spread. People from the capital were coming to attend the entrance examinations held in Nanyuan. Some of them were already here, waiting for the examinations to start. Voices of criticism spread alongside the news. The capital is reducing the intake of local students. Marquis Xia only cares about money and disregards the well-being of Nanyuan. He is even considering selling Nanyuan to Great Ming for money. Nanyuan has been abandoned by Great Xia. All sorts of rumors flew about. Some were spread by the commoners, and some were spread by those harboring evil intents. The mayor's office reacted immediately. The Windcatcher department was mobilized while Nanyuan Secondary School provided their students with an explanation of what was happening. Those from the capital would be taking the examinations using unique slots. Nanyuan's original slots would remain untouched. They would not encroach upon Nanyuan's benefits. With that, public opinion started changing. Naturally, not everyone believed the explanation. But at the very least, things were calming down as a majority of the population still believed the mayor's office. Windcatcher department. This wasn't Su Yu's first time here. He had visited several times before with Lu Wenyan. This time, he was here alone. Things were busy in the department and Su Yu did not trouble anyone. He was crouched at a corner beside a Windcatcher officer who was on a smoke break. "Uncle Li, have you found any cult members?" "We're looking into it." The middle-aged man was surnamed Li. He was an old officer in the department. As a 6th stage great strength cultivator, he was only a low-rank officer. Despite his weak cultivation, he had been in the department for many years, so he had a strong network in it. While smoking, he smiled and said, "Little Su, out of all Nanyuan students, you're the best." He raised his thumb. "Before even graduating, you're already out here hunting cult members. No other student has done so before. However," the middle-aged man lowered his voice, "your teacher isn't here this time. It is too dangerous for you to join us alone. I'll be frank. Without your teacher around, we might not be able to help you in time if you encounter danger." Su Yu nodded like an obedient boy before saying, "Uncle Li, I won't make trouble for you guys. I'll just wait far away from the main unit. You guys will be the ones doing the heavy lifting. If I can get one seriously injured escaped cult member to complete the task my instructor gave me, I'll be happy." The middle-aged man smiled, "Don't worry. If there is a chance, we'll release a seriously injured guy from our encirclement. We're willing to show Instructor Lu this much respect. Even the chief won't disregard the instructor. Furthermore, we all know your old man. Back then, he would occasionally help us with the cult members. He is as good as an external agent of the Windcatcher department." Su Yu smiled and hurriedly voiced his gratitude. In truth, his father wasn't the type to enjoy meddling in the affairs of others. But when it comes to killing cult members, anyone capable of combat in Nanyuan would willingly help. As a 9th stage great strength cultivator, Su Long could be considered a decent expert in Nanyuan. While the two were talking, a team leader shouted, "Northern team, gather up." At that command, Old Li flicked his cigarette away and rushed toward the main hall. Su Yu also hurriedly followed the older man. Instead of entering the formation of the team, he stood behind them silently. The team leader glanced at him without commenting. He addressed the assembled group, "Traces of the Myriad race cult have been discovered at the outskirts. This time, there aren't a lot of them. Only a small number of them are there trying to incite the locals. According to what we know, there are at least 3 of them. Their strength is unknown, but considering their task, we doubt they will be strong. The northern team will be in charge of this mission. You have 3 minutes to get ready and set off." "All right." Everyone answered. This team was composed of 30 Windcatcher officers. That wasn't a small team. The team leader was a 9th stage great strength cultivator. There were also several officers at the 7th stage great strength realm and above. The rest of them were no weaker than the 4th stage great strength realm. As the team members dispersed to make their preparations, the team leader walked up to Su Yu and solemnly said, "The chief has a different mission, so he won't be with us. Your instructor is not with us today as well, Su Yu. You've joined several of our missions before. You know how dangerous things can get. I know your instructor is a Skysoar cultivator. I also have a good relationship with your father. But during the duration of this mission, nobody will be able to focus on taking care of you. This is an active mission. It's not a game. Any carelessness can result in death. Here, people are constantly dying in the line of duty. You can come with us, but remember to not get in our way. When encountering danger, you can run. You can ask for help. But we might not be able to help. Your life is valuable. But the lives of others are just as valuable. We won't jeopardize the mission for your sake. The team leader was stern. You can choose to leave. If not, you will have to bear with the consequences that might arise from your choice. As a source opening cultivator, Suyu was too weak. Although he had joined them on other missions before, he had done so in the presence of Lu Wenyan and the chief of the department. There was practically no danger to him with those two around. It was different this time. He was alone. Don't worry, team leader Lu. My father is a military man while I can be considered a reserve soldier. I won't bring trouble to you guys. Team leader Lu nodded. His expression eased up as he reminded, be careful. I heard that you're a cultural researcher and you have some special tricks. But remember to not act rashly. I understand. Suyu answered with a helpless smile. Cultural researcher? He was far from one. The people of Nanyuan still knew too little about cultural researchers. Nobody below the Skysoar realm could be truly considered a cultural researcher. 3 minutes later, the fully armed team was gathered yet again. Outside the building, 2 trucks were waiting. The officers boarded the trucks with Suyu in their midst. In the truck, everyone was silently checking over their equipment and supplies. Suyu did the same. A middle-tier yellow-grade saber and 4 drops of iron-winged bird blood essence. He had purchased 3 drops from the secondary school earlier with 3 merit points. He only had 10 merit points remaining. It was always good to be prepared lest he encountered a dangerous situation that required more than a drop of blood essence. He also made sure to keep the 4 drops separately in case all of them were lost or damaged together. One of them was kept in a capsule that he hid in his mouth. In an emergency, he could directly swallow it. After several days of practice with the lightning source blade, Suyu had finally achieved basic mastery with great difficulty. He was already able to use the first move, albeit at a slow speed. The lightning source blade required a large amount of source chi to activate. Since Suyu still couldn't utilize external source chi, he also brought a drop of source chi liquid with him. His final drop was left at home. There was no need for him to take all of them with him. A single drop would be enough for the mission. 3 drops of blood essence and 1 drop of source chi liquid are worth around $200,000. Suyu sighed. Including his saber, he had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars preparing for this mission. If he returned empty-handed, it would be awful. The best result would be to kill a great strength cult member and earn some merit points without using any of his expensive trump cards. If he was forced to use his trump cards such as a drop of blood essence for example, he would need to kill at least 1 great strength cultivator to make up for the loss. This was his first time joining a mission like this alone. Thus, he was both excited and nervous. If he was careless this time, there would be nobody to save his skin. Oldly was seated beside him. After he was done inspecting his equipment, he looked at Suyu. When he noticed Suyu's taut muscles, he smiled and said, "Relax a bit. Don't be too nervous. When we're there, we will leave the truck and travel on foot. You might not even be able to keep up with us." Suyu nodded. He seriously said, "I understand. I will be waiting further away from the team. Be very careful. If the escaped enemy is in a good condition, pretend you see nothing even if you can actually see them. It doesn't matter if they manage to escape. It's only a matter of time before we hunt them down. Don't throw your life away here." "Thank you, Uncle Lee." The others in the truck heard their conversation as well. One of them, a young man who looked only slightly older than Suyu, laughed and said, "I took part in my first mission 5 years ago. I was also very nervous then. But eventually, I got used to it. Suyu, just do what you think is the best. Don't be afraid." "Thank you, Big Brother Chen." Big Brother Chen was quite young. He wasn't even 30. In the Windcatcher department, he was basically a youngster. In the mood to chat more, he smiled and asked, "Suyu, you are very talented in physical cultivation as well. Have you never considered joining a war academy?" /P. My instructor is a cultural researcher. Suyu smiled, "Since he wants me to enter a cultural research academy, I can only do so." True. Instructor Lu is actually a cultural researcher. I've only learned that recently. Big Brother Chin lamented, in Great Xia, warriors are of little value. The cultural researchers are the actual treasures. 5 years ago, I graduated from the Windcatcher Academy. Graduates of the Windcatcher Academy have a hard time finding a job at the capital unless one is a top genius. People like us can only return home and look for a job locally. But the Cultural Research Academy is different. Upon graduation, one will be a cultural researcher all factions will fight for. He was in a melancholic mood. At the Windcatcher Academy, one could graduate at middle stage great strength realm. But at the Cultural Researcher Academy, one could only graduate upon reaching the Skysoar realm. That alone showed the great gap between the two academies. Big Brother Chen did not wallow in melancholy as he smiled and said, Su Yu, you will understand how difficult it is to graduate after entering the academy. Each year, less than 50 students manage to graduate while they have a yearly intake of nearly 2,000 students. Only about 2.5% of the students could graduate. There are also many old students in the academy. Very few of them can graduate within 10 years. So few? Su Yu was first astonished, but he nodded in understanding shortly after. That was understandable. Since only those at the Skysoar realm could graduate, the academy was basically producing 50 Skysoar cultivators per year. That was actually not a small number. That was basically the equivalent of 50 Nanyuan mayors per year. Some of the people in the truck weren't aware about all that as well. One of them was free after he was done inspecting his equipment and joined the conversation, it's so hard to graduate there? A lot of the older Windcatcher officers were actually retired or transferred soldiers. The Windcatcher Academy had not been established for long. Thus, most of their graduates were still quite young. Some of the older officers in the team were people who had never been to the capital. Big Brother Chin nodded, it's very difficult. Of course, they have a very different standard when graduating their students. Instructor Liu, for example, can be considered a fresh graduate as well. And he is not the first student to graduate at such an old age. The expressions of everyone in the truck turned odd. Fresh graduate? That old man? Forget it. The world of those from the capital was something they wouldn't be able to understand. As far as they were concerned, Instructor Liu was basically equal in status with the mayor. But it turned out that he was just a fresh graduate of the Great Xia Cultural Research Academy. As they conversed, they arrived at their destination. Instead of going straight to the area where the enemies were last sighted, they stopped a kilometer away. After everyone left the trucks, the team leader did not say anything. With a wave of his hand, the team split into two and advanced toward their target from two separate directions. Chapter 62, Killing Another Great Strength Cultivator, 2. Su Yu did not join the others. Instead, he carefully followed about 300 meters behind the two groups. He was not planning to become the vanguard of this mission. Instead, he was going to wait further away and see if there was an opportunity for him to get a kill. Nobody knew how many enemies they were going to face. The report claimed that there were 3 enemies, but these experienced officers knew that the information they received might not necessarily be accurate. More enemies might be hidden nearby. In fact, each year, there would be officers dying from inaccurate intelligence. That was not something they could avoid. And even if there were really only 3 enemies, if one of them was an infinite strength or even a Skysoar cultivator, things would turn troublesome as well. They might still stand a chance against an infinite strength cultivator, but if there was a Skysoar cultivator, the officers could only blame their bad luck for the encounter. Finally, an ordinary-looking house appeared not far ahead. The houses in this neighborhood shared similar designs. Near the house was a small field with some crops grown on it. The house's location granted its inhabitants a clear view of its surroundings. This was the favorite kind of hideout for the cult members as they could easily discover their enemies and flee before being surrounded. This wasn't the first time the Windcatcher officers were facing the cult. They had plenty of experience and were good at concealment. In fact, even Su Yu would not be able to notice them if he hadn't been following behind them from the get-go. All 30 of them were crawling on the ground as they advanced. Even Su Yu was staying low, hiding inside a small hole on the ground. The team leader carefully looked back. When he saw that Su Yu wasn't visible anywhere, he breathed out in relief. He was afraid that Su Yu would be careless and expose himself. That could potentially end up exposing them as well. When he was reminding Su Yu earlier, he had been afraid that the kid would be disobedient. But it seemed like that was not the case. As the son of a soldier like Su Long, Suyu did not have the arrogance that was almost always present in those from the capital. Tightening his grip on the handle of his saber, Suyu breathed softly to calm the slight excitement he was feeling. Before long, he was fully calm. This wasn't his first rodeo. He had killed several great strength cultivators before. At that point, the Windcatcher officers were roughly 100 meters away from the distant house. They could no longer conceal themselves effectively, so the team leader raised his hand. With that signal, everyone stood up. Without uttering a single word, all 30 of them charged the small house. Windcatcher department. A shout rang out. Evidently, someone was keeping watch in the house. That person had only noticed the intruders now, and with one look, he realized who the intruders were: the Windcatcher department. Run! With a shout, 6 individuals rushed out of the house. There were more than 3. The cult members scattered in different directions, not bothering to work together. The lucky would escape while the unlucky ones would end up captured by the Windcatcher department. That had always been the cult's strategy of survival. When encountering opponents they couldn't beat, they would run without hesitation. There was no teamwork to speak of. Luck would decide if one could escape or not. This strategy was surprisingly effective, as the Windcatcher department rarely split their people. After all, without their group formation, their combat strength wasn't anything special and could easily end up defeated by the cult members instead. Thus, the 30 officers did not spread too far apart. They could only surround the house from 3 directions. That allowed the additional cult members to escape. Unsurprisingly, the officers did not pursue all the cult members. Instead, they split into 3 groups of 10. 2 of them went after the escaping cult members, while the last group was led by the team leader toward the house. After kicking the door open, they rushed inside. Suyu was hiding hundreds of meters away, granting him a clear view of the entire encounter. Even observing how these officers worked was a learning process for him. If it was him leading the team, he would have probably ended up chasing after the escaping cult members, forgetting that there might be more enemies hidden in the house. That's the value of experience. Suyu was not disheartened. With more experience, he would be able to make better calls as well. The 2 pursuing groups were able to catch up to their targets. Soon, they started fighting. Sounds of weapons clashing filled the air. These officers weren't too strong, but they had excellent teamwork. Suyu estimated that the surrounded cult member he was looking at was at least a 6th stage great strength cultivator. However, he was instantly killed by the group of officers. The group of 10 officers didn't even have a 7th stage great strength cultivator among them. Suyu only gave them one look before ignoring them. He started sweeping his gaze across the area. 6 enemies had rushed out of the house earlier. 2 had been instantly killed. The 2 groups continued their pursuit, but some cult members had still managed to escape. Those fellows were quite fast. In the blink of an eye, they had all vanished. This is actually a bad hiding spot for the cult. The area is too flat. They can easily detect intruders, but escaping is difficult as well. They should choose a terrain that is more beneficial for escaping. Suyu continued learning what he could. The valuable experience he gained here might come handy in the future. My position is not very good either. Hiding behind the Windcatcher officers, the enemies might not dare to escape in this direction. Even if they have the courage to do so, they might not be able to get through the officers. Then again, I'm only here to try my luck. It is always better to be careful. As he was thinking, a shout rang out in the house. Next, several figures rushed out. Sure enough, there were more enemies inside. The 2 groups of officers were already quite far away, so nobody was there to stop the escaping cult members. Suyu could see one of them running in his direction. He instantly focused on that cult member. It was time for him to join the fight. This speed is similar to the fellow I fought before. He must be a 6th stage great strength cultivator. Behind the cult member, the Windcatcher team leader separated from his group and ran over while shouting, "Stop running and surrender your weapons." There has been a change of policy. The higher-ups have decided that the Myriad Race cult is not that bad after all. Any captured cult members can be deployed to the front line to battle for humanity instead of being executed. Suyu was doubtful, but he immediately understood. The team leader was trying to reduce the cult members' will to fight. No such order had been given. The policy had always been to execute every cult member found. Every cult member knew that there was no surviving being captured by Great Xia. Thus, they would generally struggle until the end. That would only make the battle more difficult. Suyu wondered if this cult member would buy the lie. Clearly, the cult member was not fooled. Or maybe he was still hopeful that he could escape. He continued running. 200 meters. 100 meters. The enemy was nearer and nearer to Suyu, but he seemed to be running toward a slightly different direction. Still on the ground, Suyu silently crawled over to the direction the cult member was heading toward. Before long, the enemy was dozens of meters away from him. Suyu stood up and raised his saber. Gathering his source chi, his blade shone with a dim glow. He then roared, "Stop!" It did not seem like he would be able to ambush this enemy. Thus, he could only face the enemy directly. A source opening cultivator? The cult member was stunned. A source opening cultivator. And this person was not wearing the Windcatcher Department's uniform either. Was this a civilian? A mere source opening cultivator dared to get in his way? Was this person crazy? Don't even dream of escaping. Suyu continued shouting, "By stopping you, I'll be awarded merit points. That will give me more marks during the entrance exam." Courting death. The cult member did not waste any breath. He raised his blade and swung it at Suyu. The two approached each other rapidly. Suddenly, Suyu's eyes widened. "Chief." The cult member blanked out slightly. Someone new had suddenly appeared. Standing beside the source opening cultivator was a middle-aged man. That was the Windcatcher Department's chief, Zhang Hua. Shit. The cult member's face fell. The infinite strength realm Zhang Hua was here as well. He turned around without any hesitation. At the same time, Suyu prepared his lightning source blade and swung his blade out. The cult member was still in the middle of changing directions when he suddenly heard the sound of a blade being swung. As Suyu was attacking with all his strength, he could no longer maintain the illusion. The cult member recovered his clarity of mind, but it was too late. Fake. That thought had barely surfaced in his mind when the saber struck him like a bolt of lightning. Boom. A head dropped onto the ground. A few moments later, the body collapsed as well, dyeing the ground red with blood. Suyu was pale. As he pulled his blade back, he looked around carefully, afraid that a new enemy would suddenly appear. He was nibbling on the capsule of blood essence hidden in his mouth, ready to use it if necessary. The next moment, the squad leader arrived. Looking at Suyu, he nodded before saying in astonishment, "Not bad. There is no hesitation behind your blade." The squad leader did not waste any time and left immediately after. The battle was not over. Suyu heaved a long breath of relief. He had accomplished his goal. It had been accomplished much faster and easier than he had imagined. He had killed the opponent with one hit. Since he had exhausted all his source chi, he did not dare to wait around. He hurriedly swallowed a drop of source chi liquid to replenish his source chi. There goes 100,000. I wonder if I'm making a loss or a profit here. He smiled helplessly. Killing a middle-stage great strength cultivator would grant him 2 merit points. After using a drop of source chi liquid, would this still be a profit for him? Then again, the source chi liquid could still help with his cultivation and it would stay active for a while, so it wasn't exactly a complete waste. Chapter 63, Comrade 1. After exhausting a large amount of source chi using the lightning source blade, Suyu was resting to recover. Meanwhile, fights were breaking out all around him. The battles weren't too intense as the cult members were more focused on running. They also didn't have that many people. Before long, one cult member after another was taken down. The sounds of battle within the house were also slowing down. Team leader Liu had returned to the house to help with the fight inside. With a 9th stage great strength cultivator like him there, regular great strength cultivators wouldn't be able to pose much threat. Suyu was satisfied with killing one middle stage great strength cult member. If he ignored his expenses, he had actually earned 2 merit points from that kill. This time, he had killed the enemy alone. Of course, as a tag-along, the spoils of war did not belong to him. Instead, they belonged to the Windcatcher Department. All the spoils of war would be submitted to the department before being distributed equally among the participants. Suyu would naturally not receive anything since he wasn't an actual member of the department. That was fair as just by joining this mission, he was taking the merit points that could be theirs. Without the department, he wouldn't have been able to kill the cult member. Suyu looked around. His surroundings were getting empty. The Windcatcher officers were starting to gather around the house to encircle and defeat the last remaining cult members. Suyu was unclear as to how many cult members there were in total, but from what he had seen so far, there were more than 10 of them. With that number, this hideout could be considered a medium-sized hideout. Medium-sized hideout. Suyu trembled as he realized something. With more than 10 cult members, a hideout would be classified as a medium-sized hideout. Just as that thought crossed his mind, Team Leader Lu's voice rang out in the house, "Watch out. There's a ringleader." Ah. A scream rang out, but it was quickly interrupted. Then, Team Leader Lu's furious roar sounded. The walls of the house started crumbling. Suyu was alarmed and hurriedly looked in the direction of the house. He saw that Team Leader Lu was in an intense battle against a middle-aged man who looked like he was suffering from a lung disease. Team Leader Lu fought with a military-issue saber while his opponent used a long staff. As they fought, source chi erupted non-stop around them, causing the walls around them to collapse one after another. A windcatcher officer had collapsed onto the ground while the others were trying to form an encirclement around the cult member. Little Chen. When Suyu heard that scream, he shivered. Little Chen, Big Brother Chen? Was the person who had just collapsed Big Brother Chen? That was the person who was still chatting with him not long ago in the truck. Group 2, enter your formation. While fighting, Team Leader Lu shouted, "Brothers, we found the ringleader. If we beat him, we will earn a lot of merit points." With his command, the group of 10 behind him advanced. Each of them took out an iron chain connected to some axe-like weapon. Team Leader Lu hurriedly retreated and whistling sounds rang out as the 10 iron chains were tossed forward by the group of 10. Ha! The cult member might look diseased and weak, but he was showing impressive strength. With a roar, he swept his staff forth and struck the 10 chains, creating numerous sparks in the air. One of the chains instantly snapped. The other chains were sent flying everywhere. Group 1, advance. Team Leader Lu roared. The first group that was already waiting to the side did not hesitate and stabbed at the cult member with the large tridents in their hands. With 10 attacks coming from multiple directions, the cult member, who still wasn't a Skysor cultivator, could only roar furiously and swung his staff. Numerous sparks appeared as his staff collided against the tridents. The final group was spread around them. There was no need for Team Leader Lu to give them any order as they hurriedly tossed out a massive net. "You guys are only good for these cheap tricks." The cult member roared furiously and stomped his feet before lunging at a windcatcher officer who was standing in his way. The officers rotated around the cult member while keeping the encirclement tight, not leaving a single opening for him to escape. With a net on him, multiple iron chains wrapped around him, and tridents that were constantly getting in his way, the cult member became more and more furious. At that point, Team Leader Lu had withdrawn from the encirclement. He was looking on coldly and waited outside the circle. The moment the cult member broke free, he would work with his team members and force the cult member back inside. Infinite Strength Realm. Suyu finally realized that this enemy was an infinite strength cultivator. Otherwise, with Team Leader Lu's strength as a 9th stage great strength cultivator, he would not need to work with so many people to deal with one opponent. There were also several 7th stage great strength cultivators helping him. If even so many people were taking this long to deal with this cult member, it was clear how strong this cult member was. Boom. Surrounded by a bunch of cultivators weaker than him, the cult member furiously swung his staff, breaking a trident into pieces. The officer wielding the trident was standing several meters away. Even so far away, the force of the impact was enough to rupture his arms and cause streams of blood to flow out of his arms. At the same time, an iron chain was tossed toward the cult member. The axe at the end of the chain struck the cult member, leaving a deep wound on his thigh. Great strength killing infinite strength. At that moment, Suyu suddenly understood why his father had said that on the battlefield, great strength cultivators could kill infinite strength cultivators. Right before his eyes, 30 great strength cultivators from the windcatcher department of a small city were doing precisely that, encircling an infinite strength cultivator and slowly tiring the enemy out. The windcatcher department was considered an elite department in Nanyuan, but in the all-heaven battlefield, they weren't even qualified to be a part of the main army. And yet these very people were showing to Suyu that cultivation level wasn't everything. A single pair of hands would still have a hard time contending against multiple pairs of hands. When encountering a well-structured team of combatants, even someone strong might end up defeated. Trying to tire me out? Dream on, the cult member roared, "If I go all out, some of you will die as well. Lu Pingshan, let me go and I'll leave Nanyuan. This will be good for both of us. I still have other hideouts in Nanyuan with 300 gold coins hidden in them. You can have that as your spoils of war." Lu Pingshan, Nanyuan is a small city. Do you really want to throw away an entire team of windcatcher officers? Nanyuan wasn't a powerful city, so it did not have that many windcatcher teams. If an infinite strength cultivator decided to go all out, even if the team could avoid being wiped out, they would still suffer disastrous losses. Team leader Lu ignored the offer. The moment one became a windcatcher officer, one had accepted the fact that death might come at any time. He had not expected to meet an infinite strength enemy today. This was a middle-stage infinite strength cultivator. No, that did not seem to be the case. This was only a hideout with about a dozen members. A hideout like this should not have anyone stronger than the 9th stage great strength realm. It was quite surprising that an infinite strength cultivator was here. Maybe this is a fresh infinite strength cultivator that has yet to be transferred to a different hideout. There were various positions within the Myriad race cult. Someone at the infinite strength realm should not be leading a weak group like this. Thus, it was reasonable to assume that this enemy had just broken through recently. That much was obvious from the fact that the cult member had not been able to immediately suppress him during their fight earlier. Die. Team leader Lu ignored the cult member and continued working together with his team to tire the opponent out. This person wouldn't be able to escape. Lu Pingshan. Do you really want this? Both of us will suffer if you keep pushing. The cult member swung his staff again, causing a trident wielder to fly away while spitting blood. The arms of that person were broken by the impact, so he could no longer participate in the battle. Someone else instantly stepped in to plug the opening left by the incapacitated officer. By that point, a hole had been torn by the cult member on the net they had dropped on him. However, he was already suffering from numerous wounds. Further away from the fight, Suyu was watching nervously. After a while, he started hesitating. This enemy was too strong. Even a 7th stage great strength officer had his arms broken with one hit by the enemy. If this continued, that cult member's words would come true. He might perish, but the windcatcher department would suffer disastrous losses as well. Clenching his teeth, Suyu stopped hesitating and rushed toward the fight. Shortly after, he arrived. Team leader Lu saw Suyu's approach, but he did not say anything. This was Suyu's choice. If he ended up dying here, nobody could do anything. After all, even the team leader himself could not guarantee that he would survive. The enemy was most certainly going to perish. But this northern team would probably suffer gravely as well. Team leader Lu. Scram! Lu Pingshan shouted as he glared at Suyu. If Suyu ended up getting in their way during an active mission, nobody would object even if he killed Suyu himself. The moment a battle started, this place was already a battlefield. The windcatcher department might be staying behind the front line, but they had their own battlefields as well. Suyu trembled when he saw team leader Lu's murderous eyes. This was not a regular government official. He was a true experienced killer. Team leader, I can provide interruptions. Suyu spoke softly. As the sounds of weapons clashing echoed around him, he hurriedly continued, I'm a reserve cultural researcher. I can create illusions to distract him for a split second. Will that be enough for you to kill him? Huh? Team leader Lu was on the verge of kicking Suyu away when he stopped. He asked, illusion? How long will it last? I'm not sure. Maybe 1 second? Suyu was unsure. He had never tried it against an enemy of this level before. Team leader Lu gazed at the enemy and paused for about 3 seconds. Then, he solemnly said, I'll leave an opening for him to escape. You will distract him. Suyu, military orders are absolute. I hereby order you to keep him distracted for at least 1 second. If you fail, I'll die. If you succeed, he will die and no more of us will die. Team leader Lu was able to rapidly draw up a plan. He was going to allow that man to break free before letting Suyu distract that man with illusions. He would then attack and kill. If he failed, he would be killed after getting within the enemy's range. Even so, he would still be able to deal the enemy a serious injury before dying. This was a gamble. A gamble he did not hesitate to take. Even if the gamble ended up killing him, he would still be able to leave the enemy with a serious injury. His team members would be able to quickly finish the enemy off and none of them would need to die anymore. He did not have the time to hesitate. A lot of the people in the windcatcher department were veterans from the battlefield. Team leader Lu was one such person. Thus, he would not hesitate to stake his life when needed. Suyu trembled. Military order. He did not know if he could complete the task assigned to him. He thought he could, as his illusion had worked even on people like Lu Wenyan. This enemy was only an infinite strength cultivator. It should work. But if he failed here, team leader Lu would die. Was that a responsibility he could bear? Team leader Lu did not give him the chance to hesitate. The team leader yelled, Group 2, pull back 3 meters. Group 1, use your tridents. The officers did not hesitate to carry out the orders. The cult member roared again, swinging his staff repeatedly. The officers were forced to retreat again and again. Many of the officers were already bleeding badly from their arms, but their will to fight was still as strong as ever. Team leader Lu started moving into the gap between the two groups. He did not look at Suyu, but he softly spoke, the moment he breaks through Group 1, create your illusion. I'll kill him. As for whether Suyu could carry out the order in time, he did not waste his time thinking about it. With or without Suyu, he would still do the same thing. There were only 2 options. Either he risked death or more of his team members would risk death. Suyu was feeling extremely nervous. He wanted to swallow the blood essence and join the fight, but even with the blood essence, he would only have the offensive strength of a great strength cultivator. That was useless against an infinite strength cultivator. Suyu clenched his teeth, I can only rely on my illusion. But what illusion can I use here? If he wanted to fool this opponent, regular illusions wouldn't work. He sank into thought. Using the chief? No, the chief is only at the infinite strength realm. The mayor? No. The mayor will sink the enemy deeper into despair and force him to struggle even harder. I need to give him hope, not desperation. Against a cornered infinite strength cultivator, he had to change his line of thinking. Yes, I need to create the illusion of his companion, a companion here to save him. Suyu reached a decision. He was aware that his decision would decide whether a respectable man would live or die. He wasn't really close to team leader Lu, but he did not wish to see the team leader die here. Neither did he want to see anyone else die here. Chapter 64, Comrade 2. As the cult member struggled to escape, more and more officers were injured. The cult member was also filled with injuries. His entire body was dyed red with blood. Like a desperate beast, he roared, Lu Pingshan, if I'm going to die, I'll drag all of you into the grave as well. Talk is cheap. Do it if you can. Lu Pingshan appeared cold and indifferent. With a saber in hand, he continued filling up the gaps left behind by his injured team members. Suddenly, a trident wielder was struck. The trident was sent flying while the wielder's arms broke. Lu Pingshan's expression changed as he shouted, Stop him. As Lu Pingshan rushed over, the cult member was overjoyed. He finally saw an opportunity to escape, and he was no longer in the mind to keep fighting these officers. His goal had always been to escape this place. As for what he said to Lu Pingshan earlier, those were merely threats. He definitely didn't want to die together with Lu Pingshan. Who would want to die if there was a chance to live? At the exact moment the cult member made his escape, Lu Pingshan arrived in front of him. The two were less than 3 meters away from each other. The cult member only needed to swing his staff forward to crush Lu Pingshan's skull. Naturally, if Lu Pingshan swung his blade without bothering to defend himself, he would be able to inflict a heavy injury on the cult member before dying. The cult member did not have the intention to stake his life here. Thus, he continued trying to escape. At that moment, the scene before his eyes flickered. Not far away, one of the escaped cult members appeared and shouted, The Hallmaster is here. If we can kill all these officers, we will be greatly rewarded. The Hallmaster referred to someone from the Myriad Race cult, not the Windcatcher department. Their Hallmaster had arrived? The cult member blanked out slightly. Then, he was overjoyed. A Hallmaster was someone in the Skysoar realm. Someone like that had actually arrived? He recognized the distant cult member. That was an underling of his who had escaped earlier. He did not expect to see that person returning. Clearly, that person was not returning to throw his life away. The cult member was ecstatic. Not only would he survive, he would even earn some contribution points from this. Fully eliminating a team of Windcatcher officers would earn him a decent number of points. Then, the cult member saw a figure appearing in the distant horizon. The figure appeared illusory, but the cult member did not suspect anything. After all, that figure was still quite far away. Help was here. Help had really arrived. The helper was definitely someone from their side, or that underling of his would have been killed already. Everything had happened too fast. The cult member wasn't given the time to suspect or even think of anything. For example, his underling was on the ground while the hallmaster was in the air. How did the person on the ground know that the hallmaster was coming when the hallmaster was still so far away? Did the hallmaster introduce himself loudly from far away to that underling of his? Well, there was no time to consider all that. The cult member only knew that there was hope for him. With hope, his ferocity vanished. He did not want to die. He only needed to last a little bit longer and all these annoying windcatcher officers would die. Suddenly, the world before his eyes started flickering. Not far away, Su Yu's head was hurting so much he felt like it was going to burst apart. His willpower was too weak. Thus, the moment he used his illusion on an infinite strength cultivator, he instantly overexhausted his willpower. However, he had distracted the enemy long enough. Team leader Lu was near the enemy. When he noticed that his enemy had been distracted, he immediately grabbed the chance. His enemy had actually been distracted. Su Yu had succeeded. Without making a sound, team leader Lu clenched his teeth and swung his blade. As the blade whistled through the air, the cult member recovered from the illusion. The underling and the hallmaster were all gone from his vision. There was only Lu Pingshan's vicious face and the rapidly incoming blade before his eyes. Cultural researcher. That was the cult member's final thought. He couldn't believe that a cultural researcher would actually bother to lift a finger against him. Was Lu Wenyan here? We'll die together. In his desperation, the cult member roared and swung his staff, not bothering to avoid the blade. Boom. The staff struck Lu Pingshan, creating a depression on his shoulder. However, a smile could be seen on Lu Pingshan's bloody face. In front of him, the cult member had nearly been cleaved into two. With a plop, the corpse collapsed onto the ground. Team leader. The windcatcher officers exclaimed in alarm. The 7th stage great strength officers hurriedly rushed forth and launched a few more attacks at the cult member, only stopping after the corpse was cut into mincemeat. They then rushed toward their team leader. I'm fine. Lu Pingshan was able to resist the pain. He had lost an arm from that clash, but it was worth it as an infinite strength enemy had been killed as an exchange. With a trembling voice, Lu Pingshan ordered, continue searching the battlefield. Make sure no cult members are pretending to be dead. After giving his order, he looked at Su Yu. At that moment, the pale Su Yu was resting with his eyes shut. A fierce grin bloomed on Lu Pingshan's face. Su Long's son was indeed not a coward. About 15 minutes later. After a short rest, Su Yu had recovered somewhat. He was still pale, but he was feeling much better. He did not feel any joy. Instead, he sank into a silent melancholy. 2 were killed and about a dozen were injured. That was the casualties they had suffered. The corpses of the dead officers had already been retrieved. The 2 corpses were lying before all of them. Meanwhile, team leader Lu had applied some bandages on the wound on his shoulder. That arm of his was as good as gone, but he did not seem to care about his arm. While resisting his pain and sorrow, he grinned, not bad. We killed 13 enemies. There's even an infinite strength cultivator among them. This is worth a lot of merit points. As for our 2 departed brothers. The smile on Lu Pingshan's face turned ferocious as he said, all of us are ready to face death the moment we step onto the battlefield. With their deaths, Nanyuan will compensate 300,000 to their families, the capital will also compensate 200,000, and us brothers can also gather up some money. Including the rewards of this mission, their families will gain at least $1 million. It's only a pity that little Chen is still too young. As for that crafty old Zhou, this is a worthy death for him. Team leader Lu's smile looked so ugly that it looked like he was crying instead of smiling. His face was filled with blood, and his face was twisted as he forced himself to smile. Little Chen was dead. The young officer who chatted with Su Yu on their journey here was the first to be killed. He was the first person to discover the enemy hidden in the attic of the house. Upon discovery, the enemy had held nothing back and instantly killed him. Su Yu stood in silence. He had seen people dying before, but Big Brother Chen had still just been chatting with him not too long ago. And now, he was a cold corpse on the ground. Su Yu did not know how to describe his current emotions. He recalled that his father was fighting on an even scarier battlefield. A battlefield 1,000 times more dangerous. Myriad race cult, myriad races. Su Yu muttered to himself. He found himself developing a sense of dislike toward the 6th principle of the Cultural Research Academy. He had heard that the sixth principal was the one who had suggested accepting the foreign races as students. He suddenly felt revolted at the idea of joining the Cultural Research Academy. He did not want to study in the same academy as those bastards from the foreign races.